It was just after 9 in the morning when I pulled my truck into the driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires in that familiar way. The fishing trip had been quiet, too quiet, honestly. No trophy catches, no exciting stories to tell. Just me, a few stubborn bass that didn't want to bite, and the slow lapping of water against the dock. Normally, that kind of silence was exactly what I needed, but as I turned off the ignition and stepped out into the cool Saturday air, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling crawling up the back of my neck. Something was off. It hit me the moment I rounded the front of the truck. Lying just a couple of feet from the garage door was a men's jacket. Not mine. Not even close to mine. I froze for a second, just staring at it. It wasn't the kind of jacket you'd toss on after a trip to the hardware store or wear while tinkering in the garage. This was high-end, dark wool, tailored shoulders, subtle stitching along the lapel. I didn't recognize the brand at first, but one look at the label told me it was the sort of thing that cost more than a month's worth of my fishing trips combined. I bent down and picked it up. It felt heavier than I expected, lined with something smooth and expensive. The faintest scent of cologne clung to it, rich, spicy, and unfamiliar. Not the deodorant fresh smell of my buddies from work, not the woodsy aftershave I used myself. No, this was something else. Something deliberate. I stood there for a moment, the weight of the jacket pulling at my arm while the morning breeze stirred the hem. That creeping sense of wrongness deepened. I hadn't been gone more than 24 hours. Jenna had kissed me goodbye on Friday morning, telling me to catch something big before heading off to work. She'd seemed cheerful, unbothered. Nothing about that moment suggested that I'd come home to whatever this was. I slung the jacket over my shoulder and headed toward the side door of the garage. As I stepped inside, I noticed the faint hum of the coffee maker coming from the kitchen. The smell was fresh, sharp, filling the house in a way that almost masked the other scents. Toast, maybe eggs, a touch of something sweet like strawberries. I pushed open the door to the kitchen and stopped in my tracks. 2 mugs sat on the counter. Not in the sink, not drying on the rack, but right there, side by side, steam curling lazily from the tops. I could see the heat still fogging the rims. Each mug had a spoon resting inside, one handle pointing toward the left, the other toward the right, 2 people opposite hands. The plates in the sink caught my attention next. Not just 1, but 2. Both with the faint yellow smear of scrambled eggs, crumbs of toast, and a couple of strawberry tops. It wasn't the kind of thing you noticed if you weren't looking for it, but I was looking. My mind had already started pulling the thread, and every detail felt like it was unraveling something I wasn't ready to see. I was still standing there, holding that stranger's jacket, when Jenna appeared from down the hallway. The sound of her heels against the hardwood floor reached me before she did. A sharp, deliberate rhythm that didn't match the lazy pace of a Saturday morning. She came into view wearing the deep green dress I'd seen maybe 3 or 4 times in our marriage. Once at a Christmas party, once at a charity dinner, and once at a friend's wedding. It was the kind of dress you wore when you wanted to turn heads. Elegant, fitted, and definitely not something you put on to clean the house or run errands. Her hair was styled with more care than usual, soft curls framing her face, the kind of look she normally spent an hour perfecting. Her makeup was subtle but complete. Foundation, a hint of blush, mascara, and a muted lipstick that somehow made her lips stand out more. And then there was the headset, thin, sleek, barely visible against her hair, but definitely there. The kind people wear when they need both hands free but can't stop talking. When her eyes met mine, I saw it, just for a second. A flicker. Not guilt exactly, but something close to it. The kind of micro-expression you can't prepare for, the one that slips out before the brain can smooth over the truth. Her gaze dropped instantly to the jacket in my hands. That flicker sharpened into something more controlled, like watching a curtain drop on a stage. Her mouth curved into a small, practiced smile. "Oh, that's, just something from the donation pile," she said, her tone light, casual, but with a hitch in the middle of the sentence, as if she'd had to yank the words into place. Before I could respond, she was already moving toward me. Not slowly, not cautiously, quickly. Too quickly. She took the jacket from my hands in one fluid motion, folded it once without looking at it, and stuffed it into the oversized tote bag slung over her shoulder. "I have to run," she added, already halfway to the door. "Big day. Big day." Those two words sat in my chest like a stone. She didn't elaborate, didn't offer the kind of detail she normally would. Where she was going, who she'd be with, when she'd be back. Just big day. Like that was supposed to cover everything. Her voice was steady, smooth, but her eyes were the opposite. There was tension there, a flicker of something that didn't match the rest of her performance. If I hadn't been looking closely, I might have missed it. But I was looking. She stepped out the door with the same confident stride she'd had coming down the hallway. I listened to the sound of her heels on the driveway, then the car door, then the engine starting. A moment later, the tires crunched over the gravel, and she was gone. The house fell silent again, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the two mugs, the plates in the sink, and the empty space where that jacket had been. I didn't need her to explain. I didn't need to ask questions I already knew the answers to. In that moment, with the smell of someone else's cologne still lingering in my nose, I understood. Whatever she had just walked out the door to protect wasn't our marriage. And I knew, deep down, without a doubt, that I had just witnessed something she had no intention of ever telling me about. After she left, the house felt like it was holding its breath. I just stood there for a while, hands braced on the counter, staring at the cooling mugs like they might explain themselves if I looked hard enough. The jacket was gone, but the image of it was burned into my mind. Its weight in my hands, the expensive fabric, the smell of cologne that didn't belong anywhere near my home. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I'd always prided myself on being reasonable, on not letting my imagination run wild. But that morning, reason felt like it had packed its bags and left right along with Jenna. The silence gave my mind too much space to roam, and it went straight to places I didn't want it to go. I started replaying the last few months in my head, like a movie I'd already seen but never paid close attention to. Only this time, the details stood out in sharp, unforgiving clarity. First, there were the late nights at work. They'd started about 4 months ago. At first, I didn't think much of it. Jenna had always been ambitious, the kind of person who would happily put in the extra hours if it meant moving up the ladder. But then I happened to glance at her company's social media page one night while she was still working late. There was a post about how their office closed early on Fridays for summer hours. That was the first pinprick in the bubble. Then there were the morning jogs. She'd taken up running about a year ago, something I admired, until I realized she was coming back from them with her hair smoothed down, a light layer of makeup on, and the faintest trace of perfume. Who puts on perfume after a workout? She'd brush it off if I asked. Say she just stopped for coffee, or that she wanted to feel fresh before the day started. And the weekends, those had shifted too. Jenna used to be the kind of person who wanted slow mornings with pancakes, the newspaper spread across the table, maybe a drive into town later. Lately, she'd been out of town with a friend more weekends than not. When I asked who, she'd name someone I didn't know well, then throw in a detail to make it sound plausible. Like, she's been really stressed or her mom's been sick, so I'm keeping her company. It was just enough to keep me from pressing. But the biggest change was her phone. Notifications used to light it up constantly. She'd scroll absent-mindedly in front of me, laugh at memes, show me texts from friends. Now, the screen stayed dark unless she unlocked it herself, and she changed her passcode without mentioning it. I found out the new one by accident, saw the numbers over her shoulder one night, but it didn't matter much. Whenever I so much as glanced toward her phone, she'd tilt the screen away like a kid guarding a test from wandering eyes. One evening a couple of weeks ago, I'd gone out to her car to grab the reusable grocery bags. The moment I opened the door, the scent hit me. Stronger than in the jacket that morning, though unmistakably the same. That cologne. I sat there for a second, one hand on the steering wheel, breathing it in. The passenger seat was adjusted further back than Jenna ever set it, and a single black hair, shorter and thicker than hers, was stuck to the seatbelt. I didn't mention it when I came back inside. I wasn't ready for what that conversation might reveal. Even our friends seemed to know something I didn't. We used to get invited to things together, barbecues, birthdays, casual hangouts. Lately, they'd ask me if I was coming, almost like they didn't expect Jenna to be there. And when I'd mention her name in conversation, there'd be a pause, a quick change of subject. It was subtle, but it felt like they were skirting around something. The memories were piling up, and each one fit too neatly into a puzzle I didn't want to complete. I poured myself a coffee from the pot she'd left behind, ignoring the second mug still sitting there like evidence at a crime scene. I drank it standing up, staring out the window at the empty driveway, wondering whose car had been there while I was gone. I tried to convince myself it could all be nothing. Maybe she'd borrowed the jacket for a project. Maybe she'd had breakfast with a female friend who happened to have short black hair and a taste for men's cologne. But that voice in the back of my mind, the one I'd been ignoring for weeks, was getting louder. It wasn't just the jacket or the coffee or the cologne. It was the way she'd reacted when she saw me, that flicker in her eyes before she locked it down. The way she'd grabbed the jacket like it was evidence she needed to hide. The way she left without offering so much as a vague explanation. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that I wasn't imagining things. People don't change this much without a reason. And when the change comes with secrecy, with all those little tells you only notice if you're paying attention, well, there's usually one reason for that. I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself. I cleaned out the tackle box, organized the garage, even mowed the lawn, but no matter what I did, my mind circled back to the same place. I pictured her somewhere I couldn't see, with someone I didn't know, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. By evening, the tension had knotted up so tightly in my chest that I could barely sit still. I told myself I'd talk to her when she got home. Ask directly, no dancing around it. But when she finally walked through the door just before sunset, she acted like nothing was out of the ordinary. She kissed me on the cheek, set her bag down, and asked about my fishing trip in a perfectly even tone. I wanted to bring up the jacket right then, to ask why there were 2 mugs in the kitchen that morning, to demand to know whose cologne I'd smelled in her car. But something in her demeanor stopped me. It wasn't fear, at least not mine. It was calculation. The same thing I'd seen in her eyes that morning. She was prepared for me to ask, and I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of delivering a rehearsed answer. Instead, I played along. I told her about the fishing, about the quiet, about the one half-hearted bite I'd gotten before packing it in. She smiled in all the right places, but it didn't touch her eyes. That night, lying in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how much had changed without me noticing. Or maybe I had noticed, but I'd chosen not to see it. Maybe part of me had been hoping that, if I ignored the signs, they'd go away on their own. But they hadn't. They'd only gotten louder, clearer, and harder to dismiss. And now, for the first time, I knew I wasn't going to let them slide anymore. The guessing was eating me alive. I'd always thought of myself as someone who could keep a cool head, someone who didn't jump into accusations without proof. But over the last few weeks, proof felt like the only thing that would let me breathe again. Without it, I was living in a constant state of half anger, half doubt, a storm that never broke. So I made a plan. It wasn't complicated, but it was deliberate. If I was wrong, I'd feel like a fool, sure, but at least I'd be a fool with clarity. And if I was right, well, then I'd finally stop wondering. On a Wednesday afternoon, I decided to test her routine. Jenna thought I'd be out until late that night, working on a client's project across town. That gave me the perfect cover. I wrapped up early and headed home, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than they needed to. My heart was pounding in a way that didn't match the calm, quiet suburban streets I was driving through. Her car was already in the driveway when I pulled in. That alone didn't mean anything, but the sight of it felt heavier than it should have. IK** led the engine and sat there for a moment, breathing in through my nose, out through my mouth, like I was about to walk onto a stage. The living room lights were on, curtains half drawn. I walked up to the front door quietly, my boots making almost no sound on the porch. When I turned the knob and stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Not the cologne from before, this was wine. Red, the dry kind she liked to pair with pasta. And then I saw them. Jenna was on the couch, angled toward a man I'd never met in person but recognized instantly from a photo I'd once glimpsed in her phone. A photo buried in a locked album she told me was just for work documents. He was leaning close, his hand wrapped around hers, their knees touching like they were sharing some private joke. On the coffee table sat an open bottle of wine and 2 half-filled glasses. A plate of cheese and crackers was pushed off to one side, like they'd gotten distracted halfway through eating. For a second, the world narrowed to the size of that scene. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen faded. The tick of the clock on the wall slowed. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't sad. I was just still, watching, memorizing. Jenna's eyes lifted first, finding me in the doorway. I braced myself for shock, for a guilty flinch. Instead, what I saw was irritation, like I just interrupted a movie she'd been enjoying. "Michael," she said, her voice flat, "you're home early." It was the lack of surprise that told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't caught off guard. She was annoyed. The man turned slightly, his expression a strange mix of discomfort and defiance. He didn't move his hand from hers. I didn't ask who he was. I didn't ask what they were doing. The wine, the hand-holding, the dress she was wearing, low-cut, one I hadn't seen in months, said more than enough. For a few seconds, no one spoke. I could feel the moment stretching thin, ready to snap. Then Jenna sighed, a sound that was more exasperation than guilt. "I suppose this looks bad," she said, leaning back on the couch like she was settling in for a debate. "This isn't a debate," I told her. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. "It's exactly what it looks like." Her lips pressed together, and for the first time, she broke eye contact. The man, him. I could see his eyes darting between us, maybe weighing whether he should say something or just wait for an opening to leave. I stepped into the room, slow and deliberate. My gaze stayed on Jenna, but my words were for both of them. "I've been giving you the benefit of the doubt for months," I said. "The late nights, the weekends away, the phone you suddenly had to hide from me. I kept telling myself I might be wrong. I'm not wrong." The man finally pulled his hand back from hers, his posture stiffening. "Maybe we should talk about this privately," he offered, his voice low but steady. "No," I said immediately, cutting him off. "We're going to talk about it right here. No more hiding, no more pretending." Jenna's head tilted slightly, her eyes narrowing. "You're making this into something it doesn't have to be," she said. That made me laugh short, humorless. "No, Jenna. I'm seeing it for exactly what it is." Her mouth opened like she had more to say, but I held up my hand. "Don't bother. I'm not here to listen to whatever story you've practiced. I came home early for one reason, because I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. And now I have." The man stood then, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve, clearly uncomfortable with the silence that followed. "I should go," he muttered, moving toward the door. "Probably a good idea," I said without looking at him. When the door clicked shut behind him, Jenna finally stood, crossing her arms over her chest. "You've been distant for months, Michael. You're not blameless here." There it was, the shift from denial to blame. I'd been expecting it. "You're right," I said evenly. "I have been distant, because somewhere in me, I already knew this was coming. I just didn't know when I'd have to watch it happen in my own living room." Her expression hardened, but she didn't argue. The fight went out of her shoulders, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. Maybe resignation. "I guess this is the point of no return," I said finally. She didn't answer, and she didn't have to. The point had been passed the second I walked through the door and saw her fingers intertwined with his. I left the room without another word, the sound of my boots on the hardwood loud in the quiet. Upstairs, I closed the bedroom door behind me, not because I needed space to think. I already knew exactly what had to happen next, but because I didn't want to share the air with her any longer than I had to. The truth was no longer hiding in the shadows. It was sitting on my couch, drinking my wine, and looking me in the eye without shame. And now that I'd seen it for myself, there was no going back. That night I didn't sleep. Not because I was replaying the scene in the living room over and over, though it did try to creep back into my head, but because my mind had shifted into a different gear entirely. The time for questioning was over. The time for shock was over. I'd gotten my answer, and now I needed to decide what to do with it. If Jenna thought I was going to rage around the house, shout at her, and collapse into some pitiful heap, she was mistaken. I wasn't going to give her the spectacle she could later twist into Michael overreacted or Michael lost control. No, my revenge, if you could even call it that, was going to be quiet, calculated, and final. Lying there in the dark, I started making a mental list of everything I'd need to do. It wasn't a small list, but by morning, I had it memorized. The first step was simple: lock down what was mine. Before breakfast, I called my lawyer, an old friend from high school named Connor. We hadn't spoken in months, but I knew he was the type who appreciated directness. "Connor," I said as soon as he picked up, "I need you to make time for me today. Something's come up." He didn't ask for details over the phone, just told me to come by at noon. When I walked into his office later that day, I had a manila folder under my arm and a calm I didn't actually feel. I laid out the situation in plain terms. Proof of Jenna's infidelity, the timeline of her suspicious behavior, the fact that our prenup secured everything I'd owned before the marriage, including the house, the land, and the workshop I'd built with my own hands. Connor leafed through the documents slowly, nodding. "You've got leverage," he said finally. "A lot of it. If we move fast, she won't have time to maneuver for assets. We'll make sure anything joint is frozen before she can touch it." That was step 2. We filed the necessary paperwork to transfer certain investments and valuables into trusts controlled by people I trusted. My brother, my best friend, even Connor himself in one case. Joint bank accounts? Frozen by the end of the day. Credit cards? Disabled, new ones issued in my name only. It wasn't about being petty. It was about cutting off her ability to use me as her safety net while she played house with someone else. By the time I got home, I'd also arranged a meeting with her attorney, a man I'd never met but knew from reputation. We sat across a polished oak table, the air thick with the polite hostility lawyers always seemed to bring to the room. I laid out my position clearly. The house, the property, and the workshop are premarital assets, protected under a prenuptial agreement she signed without contest. She's not getting them, and I have the paperwork to prove it. Her attorney tried to shift in his chair, searching for some angle to challenge me, but there wasn't one. Connor had made sure of that. "Furthermore," I continued, "given the evidence of infidelity, I'm prepared to file in a way that makes her conduct public record. If she wants this to stay quiet, she'll accept what I'm offering, which, frankly, is more than she deserves." The attorney didn't say much after that. He knew the ground he was standing on was crumbling. I walked out of that meeting with the kind of satisfaction that doesn't come from yelling or throwing things. It comes from knowing you've just dismantled someone's plans before they even realized the game had changed. Back at the house, Jenna was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone like nothing in the world had happened. She looked up when I came in, offering a tentative smile. "Hey," she said softly, like maybe we could pretend last night hadn't happened. I didn't answer. I just went to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and started pulling boxes from the hall closet. "What are you doing?" she asked after a moment. "Making room," I said without looking at her. "For what?" "For your things." There was a beat of silence. "Michael, come on. Can we at least talk about this?" "We talked," I said, still stacking boxes. "Or rather, I saw enough to know talking won't change anything. You can pack at your pace, but you're not staying here long term. This house isn't yours, and you know it." Her voice sharpened. "You can't just kick me out." "Yes, I can," I interrupted, turning to face her fully for the first time that day. "And legally, I have every right. You signed that right away the day we got married. I made sure of it." Her jaw tightened. I could see the moment it clicked for her, that whatever future she'd been imagining, whether it was with the guy on my couch or someone else, didn't include walking away with half of what we'd built. She tried to pivot, softening her tone. "Michael, we've had problems for a while. Maybe if we just—" "No," I said, cutting her off again. "You made your choices. This is me making mine." For the next hour, I moved through the house methodically. boxing up her clothes, her shoes, her little knickknacks scattered across the shelves. Every time I walked past her, she was just standing there, phone in hand, staring at me like she didn't quite recognize the person in front of her. And maybe she didn't. Maybe she thought I'd crumble, that I'd beg her to explain, to come back, to promise it wouldn't happen again. But I wasn't interested in being the man she thought she could manipulate. By the time I was done, the boxes were stacked neatly in the guest room. I'd leave them there for now, give her a few days to figure out where she was going next. I wasn't completely heartless, but I wasn't going to make this comfortable for her either. Later that night, as I sat on the porch with a drink in hand, I thought about how different the day could have gone. I could have let my anger run wild, burned every bridge, and given her exactly the drama she could use to paint me as the villain. Instead, I'd stayed in control. I'd secured my future, stripped her of the leverage she thought she had, and made it clear this was no longer her home. The thought didn't make me happy, not exactly, but it did give me something I hadn't felt in weeks. A sense of power. Jenna could keep her secrets, her stories, and her smug little half-smiles. She could tell herself whatever she needed to in order to sleep at night. But the truth was simple. I was the one holding the cards now, and I wasn't about to let them go. At first, Jenna acted like nothing had changed. Maybe she thought the meeting with her lawyer was just a bluff on my part, or maybe she still believed she could talk me into working through things. For the next couple of days, she floated through the house with that same brittle confidence, making small talk, occasionally offering me coffee, even throwing in a few offhand comments about our plans for the future. As if the wine-soaked scene in the living room hadn't happened at all. But the cracks started to show soon enough. I noticed it first when she spent more time on the phone than usual, always stepping outside to take her calls. I couldn't hear much through the walls, but the tone told me enough. Sometimes her voice was sharp and defensive, other times low and pleading. When she came back inside, she wore that practiced neutral expression that didn't match the redness around her eyes. The truth came out in pieces. Her so-called friend from the couch, Rick, hadn't exactly offered her the grand escape she'd probably imagined. From what I gathered, he wasn't interested in moving in together, and he definitely wasn't offering to bankroll whatever lifestyle she thought she'd be walking into. Whether it was because he already had someone else or because she was suddenly a little less appealing without a stable home base, I didn't know. What I did know was that her tone toward me shifted fast. One evening, I came home to find her in the kitchen, wearing a silk blouse she hadn't bothered with in months, leaning against the counter with a glass of wine. "Hey," she said softly, her voice pitched just right. "I was thinking we could talk tonight, just the two of us. Maybe order in?" It wasn't hard to see what she was doing. The dress, the wine, the casual lean against the counter. It was the same routine she'd used back when we first started dating, the one that used to work on me every time. "Not interested," I said flatly, hanging my jacket on the hook. Her smile faltered for half a second before she caught herself. "Come on, Michael. You don't have to be like this. We've been through a lot. And we're done." I cut in. "You know that." Her eyes hardened for a moment, then softened again, like she was flipping through a Rolodex of tactics. "It doesn't have to be like this," she murmured. "It already is." I walked past her into the living room. That night was the first time I saw real frustration in her. Not the irritation from when I'd caught her on the couch with Rick, but something deeper, a frustration that her usual methods weren't working anymore. The next day, the mood shifted again. Gone was the soft voice and silk blouse. Instead, she slammed the bedroom door hard enough to rattle the frame and stalked through the house like she was looking for a fight. Every little thing I did seemed to set her off. The dishes I left in the sink. The fact that I didn't answer her when she muttered something under her breath. Even the way I looked at her. I didn't rise to it. I refused to. And the calmer I stayed, the more it seemed to throw her off balance. It didn't help her that the outside world wasn't lining up the way she'd probably hoped. Friends who used to text her constantly now seemed to vanish. I saw the unread messages on her phone dwindling. When she did get a call, her voice was overly bright, too eager, like she was trying to convince the person on the other end she was fine. I suspect word had gotten around. Small towns are like that, you don't even need to tell your side of the story. People put the pieces together on their own. And people who used to invite her out for drinks or brunch now had a sudden string of excuses. The first time I caught her scrolling through apartment listings online, I almost smiled. It wasn't because I was happy to see her looking for a place. It was because the look on her face told me she hated the options. High rent, small spaces, neighborhoods she wouldn't have considered 2 months ago. That's when I started boxing up her things in earnest. Not just a couple of outfits in the guest room, but everything. I worked room by room methodically. Her shoes went into labeled boxes. Her bathroom stuff went into a plastic bin. Even the framed photos she'd insisted on putting up came down from the walls. Every time she came home, another part of the house was stripped of her presence. And every time she saw the changes, her posture got a little tighter, her eyes a little colder. "You can't just erase me from this place," she said one afternoon. Standing in the middle of the bedroom I just cleared of her clothes. "I'm not erasing you," I said, taping a box shut. "I'm making space for my life without you in it." The look she gave me then was something between disbelief and desperation. "You don't mean that," she said, but it sounded like she was trying to convince herself. "I do," I replied. It was around that time that the desperation started leaking into everything she did. Little comments about how lonely the house would feel without her. How I'd miss having someone to come home to. How maybe we could take a break instead of ending things completely. I didn't bite. I knew the truth. She didn't want me back. She wanted the stability I represented. The house. The income. The reputation. Without those, she was just adrift. And that, I think, was what scared her most. I remember one evening in particular. I just finished in the workshop when I came inside to find her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. The light from the screen made her look pale, almost fragile. She looked up at me, eyes wet but not quite crying. "I don't know where I'm supposed to go," she said. "That's not my problem anymore," I told her. And for the first time, she didn't argue. She just looked back down at the phone like it might hold the answer. Over the next week, I kept the pressure steady. The boxes stayed in plain sight. The locks on my workshop, were changed. I stopped answering her attempts at small talk. Every move I made was a reminder. You are not staying here, and this life is no longer yours. The confidence she'd walked in with after that day on the couch was gone now. In its place was someone scrambling, someone who had gambled and lost. And the more she realized I wasn't going to save her, the more that panic showed through the cracks. I didn't enjoy watching it happen, but I also didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore, because this right here wasn't me being cruel. This was simply the consequences arriving right on schedule.